The question of forming a relationship with a guru is really not that separate from all the relationships that we have in our lives. Everything that happens on the highest level is always mimicked on all the dimensions of life, because it's a consistent system from what we can see with our physical senses till it gets more subtle, until it goes into realms that we can't easily penetrate just with our intellectual minds. But that doesn't mean that it becomes something completely else. I've always been very impressed by Swami Kriyananda's ability to take very, very subtle spiritual ideas and express them in their full magnitude, but then to build a bridge from our current experience, one that I've often quoted to but is worth noting here. When people ask, why did God create the universe and the divine being perfect bliss, Swamiji's answer was so beautiful. He said, it's the nature of bliss to want to share itself. Now, you can sort of hear that, but then he used the simplest example. If you go to a new restaurant for lunch today, aren't you just going to tell your friends about it if you really like it? Isn't that just the first thing that occurs to you? Oh, I have to call so-and-so so they can go there too. Because we intuitively know that the more expansive we are in our expression of our experiences, rather than having less from giving it away, the more we give it away, the more we will have. And it's easy for us to understand that when we think, for example, about a restaurant. We don't feel any loss by having all our friends come over there. Was it Yogi Berra, the catcher, who used to say so many funny things? One of them was, that place is so popular and crowded, nobody goes there anymore. And so we don't really think that we're going to lose anything. But then other aspects of ourselves, we have this feeling that if I give too much of it away, my money, for example, my time, my affections, we have this feeling that if we multiply them out too far, somehow or another the well's going to run dry. And we also have this in relationship to other people. How committed do I become? How much do I open my heart? How much do I listen? And it's a very interesting progression, because absolutely everything on the spiritual path is not an absolute. It's, to use Swami Kriyananda's word again, it's directional. There are certain words on the spiritual path that you really want to memorize deeply. Directional, odd and uneuphonic as it is actually one of those words, because our idea of spirituality, based as it has been on the age that's just passed, which is the age of matter and the age of form, in which things assume a certain reality and that reality can't be changed. Now, of course, since Einstein's revelation and the last couple of centuries of discovery and expanded consciousness, we have this intriguing fact that the underlying reality of even the whole material world is vibrations of energy, and that the same building block takes all these different forms. And the law of miracles, as Yogananda explains it in Autobiography of a Yogi, is having the power to understand how to take the same substance and manifest it in this way, and manifest it in this way, and manifest it in this way. And it's wreaking havoc with our comfortable ideas about my religion is right, yours is wrong, my culture is right, yours is wrong, my language is beautiful, yours is wrong, this is the role of women, this is the role of men, this is how children relate to their parents, just all the different things that we see falling to pieces around us are actually a very positive stage towards something. The present may be chaos, but the direction is good, because the direction is toward an inner understanding of unity, of independence, of the ability to manifest by our own will and our own understanding whatever it is from within us that we feel is right to do. That's why, parents and children are often so much at odds, and people rarely follow in the footsteps that are laid out before them. I read in a magazine article, this was about the culture of India. This man's family, for 5 generations, or maybe 5 generations that they knew of, had been itinerant storytellers in the rural areas of India. That was their profession. They would go to the villages. There was no television. There was no radio. They were, greatly prized. They would come. They would tell the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the stories of Krishna. 5 generations. The children would learn from the parents, and then they would do it. This man had 5 sons. Not one of them had taken the family profession. They were mostly taxi drivers in Bombay. Now, whether you think that's progress or not progress, however you describe it, it definitely describes change. Because change is what we're working with. But external change just merely mimics what we're working with inside ourselves. And even though we can read these ideas intellectually, we generally speaking can't just take it just like that and become what we might imagine we are able to become. So it's not so much a question of what we have accomplished. It's entirely a question of which way we are facing and, whether or not we're moving our feet in that direction. Or even if we're not moving our feet, at least we have our eyes in that direction, and when we finally start moving, that's the way that we're going to go. Swamiji once said to us, he was talking about people's unfortunate tendency to always be judging themselves in a negative light. He said, if you're going to judge yourself, he said, which I don't recommend at all, he said, you have to understand that there's no fixed reality to our nature. We are a vibration of energy, attuned in a certain way, expressing in a certain way, and by the time you can see it, it's already behind you. As soon as the words have come out of your mouth, it's no longer you anymore, because the mere speaking of those words, the taking of those actions, the commitment that you make has changed you. Inherently, it's changed you. So who am I now? Very difficult to know. So Swamiji said, if you want to think about yourself at all, as again, which I don't recommend, he said, see yourself as an arc of energy and judge yourself by what you aspire to become. Because your aspirations, more than any current reality, really define you. That which you are concentrating on is the magnetism that you are creating that's going to take you. That's the direction in which you're going. And even as we attempt to transform ourselves, all that matters is that we're moving toward whatever goal it can be. Because we just can't go over a distance that is bigger than our capacity to expand. I've been fascinated by an idea that Swamiji has said over and over again, but somehow it's captured me recently. He talks about in the spiritual world, in the natural world, and especially as devotees, everything is manifested from the inside out. We have an apple tree in our backyard, and we've lived in the house for a while, and I remember when the apple tree was planted. Now it's some 20 years ago. And it was a sapling when it was planted, but of course, at some point, there was an apple seed. And I mean, you know how small an apple seed is? Have you ever actually looked at an apple seed? They're really, really small. But you put that in the ground, and from the inside of that seed, this force begins to move in the direction of being an apple tree. And there's absolutely no way to get to the apple tree except by allowing the tiniest beginning of it to swell with its experience and gradually fulfill its own destiny. So each of us as devotees, we have this divinity within us. We were created from divine substance, and the seed of our very existence has eternal bliss in it. And we are literally just swelling, just like that apple seed. And there's a divine picture of where we're going. When Ananda Village first started back in the early 70s, and among the ideals that the communities of Ananda have is to be able to grow food and at least sustain yourself to a certain extent. Of course, in an urban area, it's more difficult than it is up in that community, which has 1,000 acres of land to work with. But we had a bunch of mostly college-educated, back-to-the-land, hippie-oriented young people there who really had never seen a hoe or a growing plant in their life, for the most part. And this gentleman named Honel Cassidy, who was, probably the age that I am now, but he seemed ancient at that time. He had white hair and a white beard, very dignified gentleman. And he was a master gardener. And he looked at these poor, struggling young people and realized that they were never going to get anywhere without his help. And so he committed himself, even though he'd come there really to be in retirement and to meditate, to training the gardeners. And Ananta was one of the ones he trained. And Hana would take them out to this orchard that had been neglected for many years. It was on the land, but it was neglected. And he taught him to prune the trees. By Hana would say, now stand here and look at this tree. And he says, if you look at it sensitively, you'll feel the astral pattern, the thought form of God that came out as this tree. And he said, and you have to prune the tree to match that pattern. You have to help the tree fulfill its own destiny, whatever that is meant to be. Recently, David and I went to Los Angeles. His older sister became ill and passed away a few weeks ago. And she was buried, they had a big funeral in this beautiful cemetery in Los Angeles, a big Jewish cemetery. And it included quite a few trees. And each tree was planted slightly at a distance from another tree, and every tree was different. They just got every species that would grow. And every one of those trees you could see was very carefully cared for. And just driving by, you could feel that each one of those trees had a sense of responsibility. And I said to, actually the son of the woman who died, our nephew, I said, just imagine the karma of a tree who gets to be a tree in this particular cemetery. They were just magnificent, every one of them. And you could just sort of feel that behind that form, there was this much more profound reality that was magnetizing that tree. Now, often if we take something that feels so complex, like our own personal development, I mean, I don't know what it's like inside of your head, but, well, let's just leave it there. I remember Nitai once, who is well known for living in the world of ideas. He's a devotee at Ananda Village. He was giving a sermon once, and he said, he was just talking about how oblivious he is to the physical plane and various things. He said, you know, if you could see the world as I see it, well, actually, you wouldn't see it. That's what he said. But that's, we all live differently. When I go inside my own head, there's so many different forces at play. You know, there's the aspiration for divine realization, there's the fear of expansion, there's attachment to all my little systems and, you know, the pleasure I get in the way I make my tea in the morning and the little system that I use and the comfort you get from the small things, and I love my comforter when I get into bed at night. You know, everybody has their things. We set ourselves up in all these little ways, and then you read about Babaji and you want to cast everything out and incinerate all your clothes and just, you know, dress yourself in bark and stand at the corner. You know, it's just like, I'm sure, this is just me, but I'm sure you have your own stories, don't you? We want it to all come into this neat little package. It never comes into a neat package. You remember, the Peanuts cartoons are not as popular now as they once were, but he had that character called Pigpen. Remember Pigpen? Those of you who are as old as I. Pigpen was just a mess. He was just a very messy child. You know, children are like that. Some are always tidy, some are... There were two kids in the ashram at San Francisco at one point, Yogesh and Kalidas. You may remember, Gary, when you were there. Two boys would go out and play together. Yogesh would just come back totally disheveled, you know, and Kalidas would always come back just as neat as he went out. I mean, when they were 5, it was just the way their energy was. Well, Pigpen, he was always surrounded by a dust cloud. You know, in every panel of the cartoon, wherever he was standing, there would be dust and dirt around him. My favorite Pigpen cartoon was 4 panels. Pigpen absolutely stood there. The second panel, he's a little more disheveled. The third, he's a little more... It was just like his own nature just took him there. It didn't require any external force. Well, that's a little like us, isn't it? It doesn't seem to require any external force. Now imagine, really, from inside that story, trying to unravel that. Trying to sort out among those things what really is the strong reality, what is really going to take you where you want to go, which road among all these many roads We think, well, I'll be guided by my own inner voice. The problem is there's lots of people inside of you talking, And some of them are quite selfless and quite bold in their understanding, and some of them really, really are not to be listened to, no matter how powerfully they speak. It's always a little bit dangerous to say, well, I feel it so strongly. Yeah, I feel a lot of things really strongly, but that doesn't mean that we ought to do them. This one man once was talking to Swamiji many years ago, and he said, I feel such harmony when I do this. And after he left, I said to Swamiji, that's because I've often been able to test my ideas with Swamiji, and so this I proposed. I said, I think he feels such harmony because he's created such a self-enclosed egoic system that there's nobody in there but him. So he's all alone in there, and naturally there's no conflict, But at the end of the day, what direction are we going? Because this is a long story we're on. It's not merely the cycle of this one incarnation, but this incarnation ends, and the next one begins, and the next one, and the next one. It's a very long trajectory. It's a very huge rainbow of our energy. Which way are we facing? Where are we going? And how can we possibly understand where this road is leading if we can only see 10 feet? Just imagine how helpful it is to have a Google map, to be able to see it from the cosmos and actually see, oh yes, that looks like a positive direction, but look, it ends in a bottomless pit over here. How many times have we found ourselves having to say later, after some disaster has happened, well, seemed like a good idea at the time. What do we know? I know when I started on the spiritual path, my first spiritual book was handed to me when I was just before my 19th birthday, when I was still 18 years old. And it told me profoundly true principles of self-realization that from the first moment I read it to this moment standing here, I've never wavered in my appreciation of the fact that this is what I want, this is my aspiration. And I read and I read and I read, being an intellectual person and also being very independent, having never really met anyone whose wisdom I respected enough to want to listen to it. I remember when I was in high school, just trying to find my way in life, that my history teacher, who was one of my favorite teachers, warned me, and I quote, "Don't really be too smart because the boys won't like you." Are you kidding? I just thought, this is wisdom? This is my teacher? What am I supposed to do with information like that? Well, what I did is I sort of just stood there, because I already was too smart and the boys didn't like me. It was already a problem, right? I didn't need him to tell me. But what am I supposed to do? Become someone else? How could I be someone else? That was already too obvious to me, not a good idea. But nobody ever told me anything that I really wanted to know. They might have told me something that they knew that I didn't know, but it wasn't anything I wanted to know, because you could look in their eyes and you could see that they weren't really happy. And I thought, what have you got to tell me unless you yourself radiate the only thing worth having? I just wasn't willing to spend another incarnation just sort of making do, no matter what it looked like. And so I read and I read and I got all this philosophy in my head. And then it occurred to me, somehow we have to translate this into real life. Because already, my friends and I, we were all this kind of person. And so we talked and talked and talked, and we argued out the points, and we shared the books. It was a very exciting time, actually, that first year of doing all of this. But it didn't fundamentally change my inner experience. I knew there was a door there, but I didn't know how to get through it. So I shifted from philosophy to reading about the saints. And East-West Bookshop was not in the hands of Ananda then. It was still in Menlo Park, and it became my little temple, like it still is for many people. And I just started going over to the rack called the Saints, and I just took them out one after another. Christian saints, Indian saints, anybody I could find. Anybody who had actually done this, who'd actually perceived the direction that I wanted to go and had actually gone there. And I read the Indian epics. I just read whatever I could about it being done. Okay, so now I have in my hands that somebody's actually done it. I don't know that that made me feel better or worse. Because still, all those voices inside my head were contradicting each other. You know, in 5 minutes they would contradict each other. And my life was just, well, it didn't look like that. It actually looked like this, which is quiet desperation. And then what happened, because when you get desperate, God always answers your prayer. Swami Kriyananda tells the story of his desire for truth. And first he drops out of college to be a playwright, then he drops out of being a writer to just be a seeker, and then he finally decides he's going to drop out of society altogether and go off and just be a hermit somewhere. He's just trying to sort out, how does he get where he's trying to go? And when he reached the point where he was literally willing to walk away from everything and just go live out in the jungle and try to figure this out by himself, he finds Autobiography of a Yogi in a New York City bookstore. He lived in New York. He could have found that book at any point. But he didn't find it until he was serious enough that he was willing to think beyond all of the structures that he had built for himself. And then he said he saw the autobiography. Even the first time he saw it, he didn't take it. But the second time he saw it, he saw Master's eyes, that photograph, and he just knew. He knew that Master had what he wanted. He knew there was wisdom here. He knew this was someone he could trust, who was going to tell him something that he really wanted to know, and even if he didn't understand, he knew that the truth was being spoken to him. And he talks about how he held that book in the bookstore. He's 22 years old in New York City. And he talks about how, just by chance, a friend of his comes into the bookstore when he's buying Autobiography of a Yogi. And the friend is a very ambitious person. Swami grew up in an upper middle class family. People of great achievement and education and wealth. And this, peer of his talks about how he's getting started in the advertising business, and this is really going to be, he's going to make a killing here. There's a lot of money to be made in this field, and he can really see his future unfolding. And Swami talks about how exuberant this man was about it. And Swamiji said the more his friend talked to him, the more Swami clutched Autobiography of a Yogi to his heart. He hadn't even met Yogananda. He hadn't read the book. But as he put it, he said, this strange yogi and I were partners in our way of life, and he was protecting me from the force of this man. Now, these are not rational experiences, and these are not experiences that just start in one lifetime. This is picking up the thread where we left off. This is having done our best to go in the right direction for as many incarnations as we can, and then at the critical moment, it all begins to roll again. I was speaking of my own life. I enjoy the fact that I also was 22 when I met Swami Kriyananda for the first time. And I had already dropped out of quite a lot, given my thought and my energy to understanding this philosophy, trying to immerse myself in it, and I didn't have any idea how this was ever going to work out. At 22 years old, it's not a very happy position to see no road in front of you. I had one desire and no way to get there. Swami Kriyananda walked into the room. And I've told you this story before, but he walked in, he did not say a word. And my entire relationship, which is 40 years more than that later, happened like that. He walked into the room, and I felt his vibration, I felt his consciousness. And for the first time in my life, I was looking at what I wanted to be. And then you add up into it all sorts of things. He's brilliant, he's interesting, he's a great teacher, he's fun, he represents a great lineage, he's a disciple of a great master, he's doing a marvelously fun work. All these different things. But none of that would make any difference if he didn't have the consciousness that I wanted. And the second half then is, when we see it and know that it's happened, we have to have the faith in ourselves and the courage to make our life around what we perceive. And that's where everybody else inside begins to talk to us. Oh, maybe so. Maybe you ought to think about this. Maybe you ought to hedge your bet. Are you certain you know? Did you know about this? And what about that? You know, it's like this. I think of myself in those first years. God gave me an insight many years later into what those first years were like, because I remember them differently. Mentally, I was pigpen, with all that stuff swirling around. Like inside my brain, which had been my head, which had always been my way of moving through the world, it was a swirling, confusing mess, is the only word I can think of. Just up and down, and different ideas, and this and that. But this, from my heart. I had seen what I wanted, and if I just kept walking, I knew I would get there, and let the rest of it do what it wanted to. So we would sort of go, we don't go in a straight line. We go up and down, but we know where we're going, we know how we're going to get there, and we've met the one who's going to take us there. Do we want to wander around in the hills having the satisfaction of doing it ourselves? Or do we want to get there? That's really what it comes down to. Is it just that we just want to entertain ourselves having these really far out ideas? Swami Kriyananda said when he was teaching yoga in the building of Ananda, he taught yoga classes from Santa Rosa down to San Jose for a number of years, just earning the money to buy the first property. This was in the late 60s. And he would teach Hatha yoga and then Raja yoga. He would teach them how to do yoga postures, then how to meditate in a 2-part class. And he just got anybody who would come, and he was teaching in Sacramento actually at that point, and this woman signed up again for the second course to take the whole thing a second time, and she said to him just frankly, I just really signed up for this class so I'd have something interesting to say at my bridge club. But then she said, but this is really serious and I like it. So once we see that this is serious and I like this, and some part of us, even a very small part of us, has recognized, this can take me there. Whether it's Master himself, whether it's Swamiji, whether it's the chanting, the music, the coming to the temple, whatever it might be that moves you, focus on it with all the sincere energy you can. We can't be more than we are. Much as I would like to just burn all the clothes in my closet and live out in the courtyard under a leaf, I think after a few hours I would just go back upstairs. I just don't think it's really who I'm meant to be. And there's a lot more sensible things that I would like to be that I'm not. But it doesn't really make any difference, because we are an object in motion, and if we're going to where we're trying to go, then the day will come when we'll stand there and we'll look back and we'll say, it's like my friend once described it, it's like an ice cube melting, the transformation of consciousness. There seems to be this big obstacle in your way, and then all of a sudden the obstacle isn't there anymore. And there was never actually a moment when you remember it being removed. It was just there and it wasn't. But how that happens is through this link. This is what all the scriptures tell us. We see the personification of what we want to be, we focus our attention on it, and no matter what else happens around it, you never take your eye off the goal. And your aspiration and the divine magnetism, you find yourself exactly where you long to be. God bless you.